Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today for State Super's second annual member meeting. I'm Bonnie Bly from Nous Group, and I'll be facilitating this important meeting on behalf of State Super. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, the traditional custodians of the land on which we gather today, and pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. I'd also like to extend that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people present online today. Now it is my pleasure to introduce the State Super team who are joining you today. We have Chair Nick Johnson, we have Chief Executive Officer John Livanis, Chief Experience Officer Nada Saratkov, and Chief Investment Officer Charles Wu joining me today. Today's meeting is a reminder that State Super serves over 85,000 members and manages their retirement funds, currently amounting to more than $38 billion. As public sector workers, current and retired, who serve the people of New South Wales, we invited you to hear directly from State Super. We were very pleased to see that over 755 members registered to attend, and we welcome you warmly today to this event to see and hear from the executive team. You'll have a question box in the corner of your screen where you can type in and submit a question if you choose. We've also received a number of really compelling questions during the registration process. To protect your privacy, we're not able to answer questions relating to your personal finances at this meeting. Now I'll briefly recap the planned agenda for this morning. First, Nick will provide a strategic update on the topics that the board have focused on in the past year. And then John will take us through developments in the organisation and the fund. Chief Investment Officer Charles will talk more about the investment environment of the past year. And last but not least, Chief Experience Officer Nada will provide an overview of our members and future profile and how we'll continue to deliver on members' best interests. The team will then spend some time answering the questions that you've submitted. So let's get started and hear first from Nicholas Johnson, Chair of State Super.
Thank you, Bonnie. Good morning. My name is Nick Johnson and I'm the chairperson of State Super. 12 months ago, we held our first member general meeting. It was very popular with you, our members, so I'm delighted to be talking to you again this year. This morning, I've been reading reports from the climate change conference being held in Dubai, the so-called COP28. Clearly, progress towards decarbonisation isn't easy, but it's a goal that seems to be well supported by you, our members. So today, I'll focus on the board's approach to responsible investing and on our expectations for responsible behaviour by the companies in which your funds are invested. This is not an easy subject, so I'll illustrate the approach with a real-life recent case study involving Qantas. State Super holds shares in Qantas, and I'll describe how we decided to cast our votes for various motions at the Qantas annual general meeting in November. Responsible investment, or sustainable finance, is popular convenient shorthand to capture environmental, social and governance issues. Or to put it another way, to climate change, to respect for workers, and to how companies are run in the 21st century. I'd like to refer to a recent quote from Stephen Jones, Minister for Financial Services. He said, "Sustainable finance is here as a political and an economic issue, and it's not going away. Everyone can be confident that you've finally got a government that believes in sustainable finance." End of quote. State Super recognises this government expectation that super funds, as major investors in Australian companies, should demand increasingly proactive, responsible practices and behaviour from the companies in which they invest, with practices to include a range of environmental, social and governance issues. Your trustee board takes those expectations very seriously, and we believe that you, the members, have similar expectations of how you want your fund to oversee the behaviour of companies with which you are associated. In short, we're increasingly applying a responsible practices test across all aspects of State Super's operations and investments. So in this environment of increasing awareness of responsibility, let me talk about how we seek to influence the behaviour of companies in which we invest, about whether our engagement is effective and about how we track subsequent change, hopefully improvement in the responsible operations and behaviour of those companies. On the first point of influencing behaviour, it's useful to analyse the recent actions and decisions taken around State Super shares in Qantas. You've probably all read much about Qantas over the past months. Hardly a day passed without media reports about allegedly excessive executive pay, about political influence, about ghost flights, the practice of selling seats on planes already cancelled, and about the uncertain legitimacy of large-scale dismissals of workers. Qantas has scheduled its annual general meeting for early November, when shareholders would vote on the reappointment of several existing and new board members, as well as ratifying the remuneration recommendations for senior executive and board pay. Now, as a significant shareholder in Qantas, State Super has voting rights associated with its shares. With so much media attention, the issue of how those votes should be cast became of growing interest to the trustee board. Here I must explain that the fund has well-established procedures for routinely determining how our votes should be cast in all the meetings of the many companies in which we invest. Those regular procedures don't usually involve the board in the many resolutions which are voted on. Generally, the votes by the various portfolios of the defined contribution funds held in Australian and overseas markets are cast by the State Super management team. Those votes are usually cast in line with the voting advice provided by our external proxy advisors, who are voting specialists with an approach to responsible behaviour that is aligned with our own. The procedure for the defined benefit portfolio is slightly different, since those funds are managed by T Corp, which also holds the voting rights for the underlying shares. The responsible investment teams of State Super and T Corp liaise closely to ensure that the voting of the defined benefits and defined contributions funds are, as far as possible, similar. These procedures work well in the normal course of things, but the board reserves its right to become directly involved in votes that have particular significance or public interest. The Qantas actions and media attention was such that the board concluded that, as far as possible, the votes cast by our asset managers should be directly instructed by State Super, i.e. not left to their discretion. At that point, our responsible investment team participated in direct conversations with our proxy advisors and with the investor relationship team of Qantas. Then John Levarnis, our chief executive, and I had a direct conversation with the chairman of Qantas, Richard Goyder, to hear his perspectives on that series of apparently undesirable business decisions made by Qantas. By that time, the intensity of public questions being raised had reached the point when Mr. Goyder announced his own intention to step down from the role within the next 12 months, as soon as the new chair can be installed. Subsequently, with all our then first-hand knowledge, the Board Investment Committee convened to discuss our position. We concluded that the proposed remuneration seemed excessive, given the scale of missteps by the board and management and the associated brand damage. We therefore decided to vote the defined contribution shares against the Qantas remuneration recommendations and against the appointment of one of the existing Qantas directors, Todd Sampson, who was a brand management specialist on the board. Not surprisingly, similar voting conclusions were reached by many other major investors in Qantas. At the AGM, the remuneration report was rejected by a huge 83% majority of votes cast, the largest remuneration rejection in Australian corporate history. A similar vote on the remuneration report next year, a so-called second strike, will result in the whole board being put up for election and possibly dismissed. Mr. Sampson's reappointment was, however, confirmed by a 66% vote in favour and 34% against. Not the result we wanted, but still I imagine Mr. Sampson will have much to reflect on in the coming year. I believe this Qantas vote, and specifically the process a trustee adopted, is a good illustration of how we go about influencing the behaviour of a company we're uncomfortable with. The board can't undertake this level of involvement in every vote, in every company in which we hold shares. But we stand ready to become actively involved in similar issues where companies seem to be failing to meet the ethical standards we, and you, the members, expect from companies in which your funds are invested. Last year, I outlined a framework to allow us to track the effectiveness of our engagement in promoting improved performance from the companies we're investing in. I referred to quantitative yardsticks based on published metrics, which the board will be carefully monitoring over the period to 2025, when we have a target of a 25% reduction, and to 2030, with a 45% target reduction in carbon emissions over 2020 levels, continuing through to a net zero carbon emission target by 2050. Those key metrics are intended to measure both the portfolio total carbon emissions and the carbon intensity of our portfolio, which reflects the carbon emitted per dollar of sales revenue. We also monitor other reported corporate behaviours, such as published greenhouse gas emission reduction targets and commitment to support affected parties in the transition to a low-carbon future. So, are those metrics working? And what can we conclude from the evidence of the past year? Well, I'm pleased to report that the short answer is probably yes. The metrics are working, and probably yes, total carbon emissions and intensity in the portfolio are declining at a rate consistent with the 2025 and 2030 targets. Our only reservation is that we're still working through a more rigorous review of the available data to satisfy ourselves that we're not being misled by intentional or unintentional greenwashing of published corporate data. I'd also say that the progress towards carbon targets won't be a constant linear reduction each year, so expect some lumpiness over the coming years. I know this has been a long discussion about our responsible investing approach, but it illustrates the importance being given by the board to the topic. The trustee is committed to working in the best financial interests of all members. We believe we can meet that obligation while also investing and managing your funds in ways that will do much to support and underpin the strength of our society and the world in which we live. I'd now like to hand back to Bonnie to move to the next part of our presentation today. Thanks.
Many thanks, Nick. And now to Chief Executive Officer, John Libanis.
Thank you, Nick, and thank you, Bonnie. Dear all, welcome, and thank you for taking the time to join us today. Last year, we had over 800 members register. This year, we again have close to 800 registrations for today's meeting. I should say that as a proportion of members, State Super has had close to the very best representation of all funds. A sincere thank you for your involvement and interest. Knowing you are so engaged with our fund makes our jobs even more fulfilling. I'd also like to thank you for your questions. So far, we've had around 40 questions submitted on registration, as well as many more coming through live today online. We'll do our best to answer your questions at the end of the session. I should say that where questions of a financial planning nature, please feel free to contact our financial planning preferred partner, Aware Super. And where they relate to your specific benefits, please feel free to contact our call centre on 1300 1300 95. I'd also like to introduce you to two of our executives, Charles Wu and Nada Saratkov. As our chair noted, responsible investing permeates through our organisation. Charles Wu, our CIO, is responsible for how your money is invested and will be more explicit about how we apply these techniques to investments to manage risk and how the fund is responding to the investment challenges in the current environment. Nada Saratkov is our Chief Experience Officer. Ensuring that members have a great experience is one of the most challenging jobs in State Super and requires the alignment of administration, the response to your calls, the communication you receive, the way your disputes are managed, and understanding our evolving membership. I'd also like to do a shout out to the rest of our executive. Nish Patel, who's our Chief Financial Officer, Alan Parapuram, who's our Chief Legal Counsel and Company Secretary, Jag Narayan, our Chief Risk Officer, Shobha Nair, who's our Head of People and Culture, Kiri Pratt, who is our General Manager of Defined Benefit Funds and Actuarial, and Jason Hazel, who is our General Manager of Defined Contribution Funds, and is currently seconded to managing a very large transaction, selling our interests in a number of airports in Queensland. I'll talk about that later. Our executives and our dedicated staff in State Super are committed to helping members, providing you with the very best experience and best investment returns. How can I be sure? Apart from the fact that each of our team is smart and wonderful, collectively we're even better. Moreover, we measure our performance in a number of ways. For example, our member engagement scores have been great for several years. Members are particularly satisfied about our call center and financial planning. Scores are high 7s and 8s out of 10. Nada will talk about that later on. Our internal risk culture is one that allows openness and quick identification and discussions of issues as they arise. We measure that too. Our employee engagement scores are pretty close to the top of any agency in New South Wales, with an engagement score of 78%. And our investment returns have been close at or close to the top quartile for the last 10 years. And in fact, on a risk-adjusted basis, amongst the best in Australia. And Charles will highlight that. Today, I'd like to brief you on 3 things. Firstly, how we apply responsible investing to the organisation of State Super rather than the funds as well, and the inauguration of our Sustainability Committee to look after that. Secondly, to give you an update of the migration of our schemes by our administrator, Mercer, and talk about some of the challenges, but also some of the benefits that might arise from this. Most importantly, I'd like to share how we mitigated the risks of the Mercer administration transition. And lastly, but most importantly, I'd like to talk about some of the innovative things that we are doing, including things like machine learning, the sale of Port of Geelong and the sale of Queensland airports, and actually a new benefit that we're looking at that we're now calling the long service benefit. So let's start off talking about responsible investing and the investing within our organisation. Responsible investing and investment stewardship is actually crucial to managing investment risks. However, at State Super, we also have a responsibility to ensure the sustainability of the organisation within which we operate, not just the funds. To this end, we have created a Sustainability Committee that will oversee and report on our internal functioning and that of our immediate suppliers. Sarah Gallard, our Head of Responsible Investing, is our inaugural chair of this committee. That committee will also be responsible for reporting in accordance with the measures set out by the Task Force for Climate Change-related Financial Disclosures, or more commonly known in the media as TCFD. Secondly, migration. Over the last 5 years, we've been extensively involved in mitigating the risk of the migration of our administration systems by Mercer. Systems migrations are amongst the most complex of superannuation processes. In the case of State Super, this becomes significantly more challenging. After all, we've over 100 years of history and scheme rules. We have over 85,000 members and history of transactions going back a generation or more. While the system migration was necessary and while Mercer was responsible for managing the process, we recognized that the impact of any errors or missteps would be held by you, our members. That's why we set about creating a risk management structure that wrapped around the Mercer migration process. We use experts to identify the risks in transition. Our people observed the steering committees. We applied processes to assess the outcomes. And more often than not, we called out risks in a way that resulted in Mercer delaying the transition, adding resources, changing direction, or even recrafting plans. As a result, over the last 5 years, Mercer has successfully transitioned 100% of the systems to Acurity. But sometimes things outside of the system's transitions break, like the recent time when human error resulted in incorrect information being sent to the ATO. That affected many existing and in fact previous members, and in particular affected members of the police. That was awful, and we sincerely regret that. We've asked Mercer to focus on supporting the people in the reporting team. And then sometimes things get delayed, like the statements for the active members this year. But we wanted to make sure that Mercer was checking and rechecking these statements before they are sent out. Apologies for the delay. I hope you will get it soon. On a brighter note, though, benefits continue being paid to pensioners as well as to people retiring. And all of this is testament to our team headed by Nada, who is tasked to bring you a brilliant member experience. Lastly, I'd like to talk about innovation. Now, State Super is not generally thought of in the same breath as Tesla or Apple when it comes to innovation. And it might surprise you to know about the many things we do internally that assist us to supporting members. So I'll list a few. 1, we're at the forefront of developing and using machine language, a form of artificial intelligence, that supports Charles's team to make better investments with lower risks. The great performance outcomes are evident. The intellectual capital that has gone into developing and learning models to pass huge amount of data is something that I really enjoy sharing with you. 2, last year we were successful in transacting the sale of Port of Geelong, a transaction of well over $1 billion. Now, Port of Geelong is one of the few freehold ports in Australia and was subject to significant scrutiny. This year, we are selling our share in Queensland Airports, a group comprising Gold Coast Airport, Townsville Airport, Mount Isa Airport, and Longreach Airport. Again, the transaction will be well over $1 billion, perhaps close to $2 billion. In both cases, those transactions are equivalent to those handled by any investment bank. And in fact, Macquarie and ART are with us in this transaction. 3, supporting frontline workers. Our members, you, have told us that your pension plan played a huge role in keeping you in the public sector at those crucial times in your lives. So what if a new 2024 style plan would help us keep our new nurses, police, teachers and firefighters in the public sector? Wouldn't that help the New South Wales? Wouldn't the productivity gains help pay for this? Wouldn't the dignity of a lifetime pension motivate people? We're working on this, and hopefully we'll be able to talk about this next year. Thank you for now, and I'd like to hand back to Bonnie. Bonnie?
Thanks, John. Next, we'd like to hear from Charles Wu, Chief Investment Officer of State Super, to hear about the investment picture.
Thank you, Bonnie, and hi everyone. It's my pleasure to be here again. Today I want to take you on a journey through the last year in the world of investment, akin to navigating a complex maze in an enchanted forest. Each turn and decisions brought us closer to the heart of the forest, where we emerged as one of the top 10 performing funds in the country. Now, this journey filled with uncharted territory, demanded strategy, and an adept understanding of different pathways, much like a master explorer, charting a course through unknown lands. Let's start with the beginning of 2022. Imagine the global economy as a gigantic interconnected web. When a significant events like a Ukraine-Russian conflict happens, it's like shaking this web. The effect ripple outwards, impacting various aspects of the world economy, including the equity market, which is a collection of markets where stocks are bought and sold. Initially, the conflict sends shockwave through these markets, causing stock price to drop. This is often a reaction to uncertainty and fear amongst investors. But the story doesn't end there. The conflict also disrupted how goods flow around the world, particularly grain and energy. Ukraine and Russia are major suppliers of these essential commodities. Without a usual supply, prices for things like wheat, oil, and natural gas skyrocket. This price hike is a classic example of inflation, where the cost of goods and services increases. Inflation affects not just the price of your groceries, but also the broader economy. Central banks like the Reserve Bank of Australia, Federal Reserve in the US, usually respond to high inflation by rising interest rates. These are the rates at which the banks lend money to each other, and they influence the rates for loans and savings for everyday people like you and me. High interest rates can cool down spending and investing as borrowing becomes more expensive. The situation led to what we call a repricing of assets. Assets include things like stock, property, and bonds. Their value depends on factors like interest rates and financial market outlook. As the interest rates surge, the value of many of these assets changed, often decreasing, because their future profitability looked different in a high interest rate environment. Understanding these connections helps us to see why an international conflict can have such a widespread impact, even affecting your local stock market and the global economy. Next, so imagine if two strong athletes started a tug of war in the middle of a crowded market. That's a bit like what happened when geopolitical tension rose between China and the United States. These two countries are like economic giants, and their actions can cause big waves in the global market. The situation got more intense when Nancy Pelosi, an important political figure in the US, visited Taiwan in August last year. This visit was controversial because Taiwan's political status is a sensitive issue, particularly with China. This tension between China and the US is like adding more obstacles to our economic maze. It made investors nervous, which often leads to selling off stocks, resulting in what we call a drawdown in the equity market. A drawdown is a drop from a peak, the highest point, to a trough, the lowest point, in the value of investment. Additionally, this tension influences how countries trade with each other. Imagine countries as shoppers who suddenly have to find new stores to buy their goods because their usual stores are in the middle of a dispute. This search for new trading partners can be costly, increasing production expenses. These rising costs then contribute further to inflation, which is likely a snowball rolling down hills, gathering more snow, or in this case, more prices increases. By October, this tension, combined with the Russian-Ukraine conflict, had a significant impact on the stock market. Some of the largest technology companies, known as the mega cap, because of their enormous market value, saw their stock prices fall by over 30%. Now, this is a big deal in the stock market world. From February to October, the overall market experienced a drawdown of about 25%. That means if the market was worth $100 at the start of the February, by October it was only worth $75. This event shows how international relations can directly impact financial markets and economies globally. Now, like many stories, there are twists and turns. Think of the financial market as a dynamic, ever-changing game, much like the maze that we're in, with twists and turns. In November 2022, the game changed significantly with the introduction of ChatGPT, an advanced artificial intelligence program. The innovation had a ripple effect, particularly in the equity market where stocks are traded. Investors were excited by the potential of this new technology, leading to a positive response in the stock market. In contrast, the bond market, where governments and companies borrow money, remained volatile. This shows how new technology can influence investors' confidence and market trends across different asset classes. Now let's talk about bonds for a sec. Bonds are like promises to pay back borrowed money with interest. They're often seen as a safer asset when compared to stocks, which is why they're called a defensive asset class. But even bonds can have their ups and downs. Over the last 18 months, the value of bonds fluctuated almost 50% from their highest to their lowest point. Now that's a huge change for an asset class known for stability. Our investment strategy is like having multiple tools to navigate through this complex financial maze. We don't depend on just one approach or one lever. This flexibility was crucial in dealing with these market changes. Despite the market experiencing a significant drop of about 25% from its highest to lowest point, our growth portfolio managed to limit its loss to around 5% during the same period and recoup quite quickly. This highlights the importance of having a diverse, well-thought-out investment strategy in the face of market uncertainties. As we look forward, we continue to fortify our portfolio's resilience. In times of uncertainty, ensuring that we maintain sufficient liquidity to meet member benefits payments. Our strategic plan including gradually reducing our holding in illiquid assets. As some of you may be aware, and as John rightly pointed out, we are contemplating the sale of our shares in the Queensland Airport. It's a strategic move to enhance our liquidity and maintain flexibility. We're eager to continue our adventures in the investment world, prepare for new challenges and opportunities. We remain committed to use our collective skills and knowledge to make informed decisions. Now, thank you for your support, and I'm proud to be part of your journey. Thank you, Bonnie.
Great, Charles. Thank you. And finally, we have Nada Suratkov, Chief Experience Officer.
Thank you, Bonnie. I want to start by saying that for our second annual member meeting, we have once again had a fabulous response. So thank you to everyone for joining us today. I'm going to start a short trip down memory lane, followed by a high-level overview of our member beliefs, our member satisfaction, highlighting the results of some of the core services we provide and how they are provided, and then I'll focus on the changing profile of our membership. The slide you are looking at reflects the significant changes over a century of the State Super Board. State Super is the trustee for a group of superannuation schemes that were formed over a period of more than 100 years. Many of our members, particularly those in the lifetime pension funds, didn't even know that they were in the fund until they reached retirement age or got closer to the retirement age. During that time frame, many of the entitlements changed for various reasons, and in particular to align to the Commonwealth Government legislative changes when that came into effect. In 1992, when the superannuation guarantee was legislated, our remaining schemes were closed to new members. State super managers schemes which have complex benefit designs, and as a result of the many superannuation and other legislative changes, this complexity has only increased. If at any time you need clarification on your particular circumstances, please contact our customer service team. In the last 5 years, we introduced our member beliefs, which many of our members played a part in developing. These beliefs are used to guide and ground us when taking decisions as they relate to members' outcomes, as and when we need to align to the regulator and the Commonwealth superannuation legislation, but also within the schemes themselves and our obligations under the Superannuation Administration Act of 1996, which governs state super. So even though we are not a regulated fund, we do everything on a best endeavours basis to meet the requirements as if we were an APRA-regulated fund. The feedback on our member beliefs remains consistently high as tracked through the independent research we conduct annually. And this is my segue into highlighting the results of our member satisfaction survey. Every year around this time, we conduct our independent member satisfaction research to track and measure the satisfaction of our members against some of our core and critical services, which you will see on this slide. At this point, I want to highlight that State Super operates on a predominantly outsourced model. In other words, over 90% of our services are provided by external organisations. One of those that is very important is the Superannuation Administration Service, and which is one of our critical service agreements. This is a contract we have with Mercer Administration Services, also known as MAS. One of the highest scores was for the telephone service as rated by our pension members. This score is critical to us because it is one of our members-facing services that is most utilised. When members call to talk to one of our representatives, it tells us that the staff are able to answer what often are very complex questions from our members, and we want to ensure that we retain that capability. The other service which I encourage you to use and for which you rated us highly include the personal interview service managed on our behalf by MAS, financial planning and seminars, both provided to our members via a contract we manage with Aware Super. The interest in the State Super membership base generated a number of questions prior to this session, so I hope I answer those questions in the next few minutes. This member snapshot slide shows that today we have over 85,000 members in total, with the largest proportion of membership being pensioners, more than 65,000, many of whom would have a reversionary or spouse pension entitlement. I would encourage all members to find out, if you have not already, all that you need to know about pension entitlements. For example, is there a spouse pension entitlement? Once a year, the pensions are indexed in line with Sydney-based CPI. This year, that was a 6.6% increase in pensions for the majority of our pension members. We also manage the benefits of about 20,000 members, which is made up of those members who are still working and making contributions, referred to as active members, and another group of members who have deferred their benefits, but upon reaching a condition of release, they can apply for their benefits. Our pension member group are ageing, and with that comes vulnerability. And what I mean by that is as people age, they become more vulnerable, and for that reason we need to continue to review our processes to ensure that members and their benefits are looked after. I will talk a little bit, but more about pension group shortly. Our membership is changing, and this slide illustrates the membership movements over the previous 5 years. Today, how it is, and forecast for the next 5 years. By the end of 2028, we will have just under 70,000 members, of which there are likely to be about 61,000 pension members. Now I'd like to cover off the way our pension increases are made, because we've received a number of questions on that. If you have submitted questions that are specific to your circumstances, we will endeavour to respond to those individually. If you need more information about your personal circumstances, please call us. I want to highlight that every individual member's circumstance is likely to be different, so I encourage you to utilise some of the services available to you. Call the State Super Customer Service Centre, attend one of our seminars, or book a personal interview, or see a financial planner. Information about all of these services and how to access them is available on our website. So I'll cover off the CPI changes as they relate to our pension members. In the 1970s, state super legislation was amended to introduce an indexed state super pension increase in line with CPI, the Consumer Price Index. This was mainly to offset the cost of living pressures. CPI measures the change in the price of a fixed basket of goods and services, and the pensions for most members are adjusted each October. You'll see on the right there the list of the CPI basket. Most years, this represents an increase in pension amounts, and for 2023, the adjustment rate was 6.6 based on CPI Sydney Index. This compares to an Australia-wide CPI rise of 6%. The following table shows just how much the CPI has moved about over the decades, depending on the broader economy. Now I'd like to show you a snapshot of the State Super Centenarians, or as we like to call it, our 100-plus club. There are 117 members who are 100 years of age or more. The gender breakdown is nearly 80-20, with 92 women and 25 men. Within this group, nearly 70% are spouse pensions, also referred to as reversionary pensions. Just over 50% of this group worked for the New South Wales Department of Education. On average, they have been receiving the pension for 30 years, and 90% of our centenarians live in New South Wales. We are going to finish this part of the meeting before we go to our Q&A with a short 2-minute video of one of our most esteemed pension members. Mr. Guy Warren, aged 102 and the oldest working artist in the country, a winner of the 1985 Archibald Prize, as well as receiving the honour of being made a member of the Order of Australia in 2014. Guy has been a member of our scheme since 1975, having joined when he was employed by the newly created Sydney College of the Arts, and has been a pension member for the last 38 years. We spoke with him last week. Thank you.
I was 15, I suppose, and I booked this funny little art school for one evening a week, and then as I got a bit more money, it became 2 evenings a week, and then it became Saturday afternoons as well. Draw reasonably well and paint reasonably well, and this little self-portrait was something I did at the time, just before I joined the Army. The Sydney College of the Arts was mooted as a new art school in Sydney, and I got interested in that. So I joined them and stayed with them until I retired. Yeah. Well, any job I've ever had has always given me the opportunity to put enough food on the table but still have enough time to paint. I remember being approached by somebody at the university to say that he thought I should join a superannuation scheme of some sort. And I'm astonished that I was intelligent enough to make the right decision, because I'm not very good at making decisions, so it surprises me that I, for once in my life, I obviously did. Well, thank God for you guys. Oh, it's been a tremendous help, yes, enormous help. I can't believe I was sensible enough to have taken it in the first place. I wish I'd taken more shares, if that's the right word. But no, I think I did exactly the right thing. In fact, I think I've been lucky all my bloody life. I mean, why do I last to 102? I haven't the faintest bloody idea. I really don't.
Thank you, Nada, and how wonderful to hear from Guy. So now let's put the attention on you, the members. We thank you for submitting your questions, and we've selected a few really interesting ones to get us started, so we'll answer those now. John, let me start with you. What are the measures that State Super has in place to ensure the security of my personal information and details? What preparations have been put in place in the event of a data breach?
Thanks, Bonnie, and wow, what a great discussion by Guy. Thank you, Guy. Look, keeping your personal information keeps me awake at night. It really does. It's important to note that most of your personal information is actually managed by Mercer, our administrator. We've got all the appropriate policies and control frameworks in place, but we know that that doesn't stop some sort of cybersecurity impact. So we continually check and test that they work. And we do this by checking in with Mercer about their controls, how they use their multi-factor authentication, and the way that our call center staff converse with our members. We also do internal audits of Mercer and of State Super and our other providers, and so on. It's not perfect, but we do try and to make sure it's enough. I actually want to call out our call center staff who foiled a number of attempts by asking that one more question that a fraudster cannot answer. Thank you. And finally, of course, should there be, unfortunately, a breach, we have worked out a playbook for what it is that we should do. I hope we never have to use it.
I'm going to stay with you, John.
Thank you.
One of our members has asked, do you have enough money in your funds to cover all of our pensions, projected using a baby boomer lifespan?
Well, us baby boomers are living forever. Thankfully, our actuaries have incorporated this into assessing liabilities. And we ask them each year, and so far they've been consistent in terms of taking that into account. So yes, the liabilities do incorporate the greater expected lifespans. Now, regarding funding, the New South Wales government, which is the largest of our 150-odd employers in the scheme, have been working with us to support our funding. I'm comfortable with where we are, and I can discuss with you our funding frameworks, our liquidity windows, but that's just boring. I think it's enough to say that New South Wales, an economy comparable to the size of Sweden, has the money.
Well, speaking of global trends, John, do you expect a US recession, and what would the flow-on effects be in Australia and on our funds?
Well, during a recession, some of us might expect that the stock market to always perform poorly, but actually that's not always the case. Stock markets often react to what investors think will happen in the future, not just what is happening right now. So if investors expect a recession, the stock market might start falling before a recession, and then start rising, paradoxically, before the recession ends. More importantly, our funds are diversified with only about half in the stock market, and the other half acts as a counterweight. So most importantly, your fund has actually done really well over the last 20 years, and we've been through a few recessions.
And how do you propose to outperform inflation?
Look, our job is to beat inflation, and here's how we do it. We hold a diversified portfolio in shares and bonds. We invest in real assets, and we also invest in inflation-linked securities. Over the term of our investment horizon, we've actually been good at beating inflation, thanks to Charles and his team.
And it's been a couple of years since we've seen the worst of COVID. How's the fund performing in the sort of post-COVID era?
Well, it's done pretty well. The balanced option has delivered approximately an annual return of 7.5% over the last 3 years. And as Charles pointed out, the way that our portfolio is designed is to be resilient to these types of shocks, like the COVID-19 market shock, which in itself caused a 15% drop in the average portfolio.
Nada, perhaps you can jump in on the next question if you don't mind.
Thank you.
Our member asks, what is State Super's position in relation to the proposed federal government's increase of taxation from 15% to 30% for those on a defined benefit superannuation deemed to be in excess of $3 million? How will the $3 million limit be determined?
Well, thank you for the question. I'm going to do the best to give you what knowledge we have as at today. So the Commonwealth Government has proposed a new 15% tax on individuals whose total superannuation balances exceed $3 million. The new tax will commence from 1 July 2025 and will be applied to the earnings derived from the member's balance in excess of the $3 million. State Super is required to comply with all income tax laws applicable to superannuation. No legislation for the proposed change has been introduced into the Parliament so far. However, a draft has been released for consultation that sets out how the government proposes to introduce the new tax. While specific detail of the valuation method used for the defined benefit members is yet to be confirmed, it is the government's intention to apply the tax in a broadly commensurate manner to those in an accumulation-style fund. For both pensioner and active contributing members, the value of your state super pension will be reported to the ATO each year and added to any other superannuation interest that you hold. The ATO will then assess your total superannuation holdings, and if they exceed $3 million, the tax will be applied on those earnings that relate to the amount over that $3 million. For state super pensioners, the ATO will issue a tax assessment directly to you, and you will have 84 days to pay the assessment. For active members, if the only super you have is your state super account, the tax debt will be deferred in full, and the ATO will send you a debt account creation notice advising you of the amount of the debt. That debt will be payable when your state super account is paid out to you. If you have both a state super account and another accumulation account, the proportion of the tax that relates to the accumulation account will not be deferred, and you will be issued with a tax assessment for that amount, which will be payable within 84 days. Thank you, Bonnie.
And can you please explain to our members why the delay in the annual reporting of statements?
Well, John's already mentioned this. So the 2023 member statements for members in most schemes were issued in October and November. Member statements for SAS members are expected to be mailed by mid-December. While this isn't our usual delivery timeframe, member statement delays following a system transition are not unusual. This is because trustees and their administrators take additional time to ensure the accuracy of member statements on the new system. We expect that next year's, the 2024 member states will be issued in the usual timeframe. Thank you, Bonnie.
Charles, I'd like to come to you next. One of our members has asked, what are your criteria for investing sustainably, environmentally, ethically, etc.?
Thank you, Bonnie, and thank you for the question. As John and Nick pointed out in their opening remark, responsible investment is an important and critical component. So when we talk about investing in a way that's good for the environment and sustainable, we have a special approach that depends on the type of investment and its rule. We always follow our responsible investment policy, and also work with our climate principle in mind. Both of them are available on the website. We have some basic rules that we stick to, and if an investment doesn't quite meet those rules, we won't put our money in it. Our goal is to lower the risk that associated with ESG issues as much as we can, and we also try to invest in a way that have positive ESG impact, but only if we think those investments can generate a commensurate return. Let me give you two examples. So Melbourne Airport plans to eliminate the greenhouse gas it directly produces. And one of the way they do it is to help to achieve the goal. They've set up a massive solar farm generating 12 megawatts power on their premises, which began operating in January. Now, this solar farm is the biggest of its kind in Australia and is located in the airport's premise. Another example, Waste Management, is a company based in North America, assists people by collecting trash and then converting it into energy. They also focus on using creative recycling methods to ensure that materials are reusable instead of being thrown away. Now, as people who invest for the long term, we believe in a company that handles the ESG better, tend to succeed and do better in the long run. We think that being actively involved and taking care of our investment help us not just the company we invest in, but also us as investor and you, the State Super's member. Thank you.
And a follow-up question for you on ESG while we're there. What percentage of State Super's investments overall are in sustainable energy industries?
Yeah. So when we think about investing in sustainable industries that could grow a lot because of the focus on low carbon product and services, we think about things such as electric vehicle, things such as solar cell manufacturers, and that number range between 7 to 10%, and the number differences simply because they're different weighting in different options.
We've got time for one final question, and this one's for the chair. Given the current international environmental and political crises, what ongoing steps does State Super take to ensure funds are invested ethically, i.e. socially responsible and sustainable investing? And how does State Super assess what constitute ethical investment?
Thanks, Bonnie. This is an important question on topics which are regularly discussed by the board and various of the board subcommittees. All our investments are made within State Super's investment framework, and as such are evaluated by our investment team against our stated policies relating to issues like climate change, modern-day slavery and corporate governance. We have specific exclusions on investing in tobacco and controversial weapons, the details of which are defined in our responsible investment policy. We also collect and monitor various asset-specific ESG measures annually as well, and we engage with our investment managers on these matters. I talked earlier about the metrics which are being applied in the tracking the reduction in carbon emissions from our portfolio. And while less tangible, we're participating in various industry discussions around the development of other measures for such related issues as biodiversity and slavery. That said, I should note that State Super is not an exclusionary ethical fund. Such ethical funds typically set very narrow investment guidelines, with their members accepting that the associated excluded investments can have a material impact on investment returns. The primary duty of State Super is to meet its pension benefit obligations to members and to achieve very high risk-adjusted returns on the members' defined contribution funds. We're delivering on that duty while applying our responsible investment policy. And my opening remarks illustrated the steps which the board will take if we're not satisfied with poor corporate behaviour. The board and management will continue to be alert to and take actions in situations that are not tolerable within our investment guidelines. Look, that concludes our presentation today. Let me just share with you three words which I heard as I listened to these various presentations. And those three words are quality, strength and focus. I'll illustrate that in a second. And I might add actually a fourth word, which is heartwarming. Heartwarming, of course, having watched the Guy Warren video, which I thought was terrific. Thank you, Guy. Going back to those three words, we talked about the quality of the State Super team who's working on your fund, which I think is really a core issue to whatever comes next. We talked about the strength of your fund's financial performance in very, very difficult markets, as Charles outlined. And we talked about the focus being given to the service and experience which you, the members, enjoy. So look, my takeaway was pretty positive. I hope you found it helpful and relevant. And we'll look forward to updating you again next year. So thank you. Bonnie, back to you.
Thank you, Nick, and thank you for those reflections as well. Thanks also to our other executives, John, Nada, Charles. Thank you very much. And a sincere appreciation and thanks to all of our members who've joined us today. We hope you've enjoyed this discussion. A reminder that the questions and answers and a video of the meeting will be published on the State Super website in the new year. Members with specific questions on their personal circumstances are asked to get in touch with State Super Customer Service Team on 1300 130 095. You'll also soon receive an email requesting you to complete a feedback survey, and we'd really appreciate it if you could just take a few minutes to let us know your thoughts about today's event. So on behalf of State Super, thank you again for being part of today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.